This is Dr. Rob Harder with the Nonprofit Leadership Podcast, Making Your World Better. What does it take to be an effective nonprofit leader today? What are the biggest challenges? What are the biggest obstacles? How should nonprofits fundraise in an economy that is constantly changing? All of these reasons combined led me to start this show. And it's my hope that through this series, people can learn not only what it takes to be an effective nonprofit organization, but to hear from effective leaders who are successfully making a positive impact in their communities. We hope you enjoy the show, as together we hear how they are making their world better. One of the challenges for an effective nonprofit leader right now is getting the right information so you can make solid financial decisions to help your organization thrive. To do this, you need the best accounting and donation software. Researching, learning, and maintaining software can get really costly. So let me save you some time and money. Aplos just might be the solution you're looking for. Go to nonprofit.aplos.com to see how it works and get your 15-day free trial. As a nonprofit leader, you eventually realize you can't do everything yourself. But hiring is complicated. Volunteers have other demands on their time, and what if you only need part-time help anyway? Well, Belay, an innovative staffing solution, has successfully matched thousands of organizations with part-time virtual assistants, bookkeepers, and social media strategists. Let Belay help you become a more effective and successful nonprofit leader, making a positive impact in the community by helping you juggle less and accomplish more. Just go to Belay, BELAY solutions.com/nonprofit leadership. Well, my guess is that many of you have seen on TV the Red Nose Day campaign. It is typically shown on NBC, sponsored by Walgreens, among other sponsors. But I wonder if you've asked the question, where does this money go and what is the Red Nose Day campaign all about anyway? Well, my guest today is Alison Moore. She is the CEO of Comic Relief US, the organization behind the Red Nose Day campaign, which is really all about ending childhood poverty. Though it started in the UK, the US branch of Comic Relief has raised over $230 million and positively impacted over 25 million children since launching in the US back in 2015. And Alison's going to share her leadership insights with us today that she's gained through both her experience in the for-profit sector as well as the nonprofit sector. Enjoy today's show. It's great to have you on the show, Alison. You have a unique perspective because of your extensive experience in branding and marketing for companies like HBO, SoundCloud, and NBC. Now you've moved into the social good sector, serving as the CEO of Comic Relief US. Talk about how that transition has gone. What have you brought from your for-profit experience into the nonprofit experience so far? And what has been your biggest surprise working in the nonprofit sector?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here and to have this conversation with you. This will probably, for anyone in the nonprofit sector, sound like kind of a stretch, but in the commercial environment, for me, for over the 25 years, let's not talk about how long it's been, the years of experience that I had in those businesses that you just listed, I always found motivation and sort of excitement and really drive around building, I would say, business operations around supporting creative purpose. This is purpose in a creative realm. So whether you're at HBO and you're sort of supporting the kind of content creators and the showrunners and the people who are making the magic sort of original content at HBO, if you're supporting at Daily Candy, I had a whole editorial team who were writing incredible content for women and just really unique. And I felt like that was my job, was to build the sort of right support for that. Same with SoundCloud with emerging artists. Frankly, NBC Universal, same idea of supporting the creative voice, and Condé Nast too. So taking that as a lens, when this opportunity came up, it was a really interesting amalgamation of everything that I had sort of worked from a functional perspective, right? On the media business side, on the sort of scale and reach and diversifying of revenue and thinking about partnerships and how to amplify people to do something and to act. So that felt very familiar. And then when obviously the purpose and the mission of Comic Relief and sort of, how we articulate that, yes, through Red Nose Day, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, but the work that we do there, the fact that I have a grant making team who is incredibly thoughtful and directed, frankly, on executing against the areas that we want to have impact and making that social impact through the organizations with whom we partner with every day. That just closed the loop for purpose. For me, that just had a higher order, obviously. Than supporting just creative vision, actually supporting communities that we think we can make an impact for.
So it sounds like, the fact that you are having not just a great connection with your team and creating great content, but you're actually making a difference in the communities you're serving. That really made a difference in what you're doing now, sounds like.
Yeah. And I think I feel like the innovation of Comic Relief, we have this hybrid model where we do kind of galvanize the public, if you will, through, it's like the democratization of the access. It's a very simple, almost absurd reason to sort of get involved as a consumer/donor, right? It's a red nose, you put it on your nose, and all of a sudden there's a donation sort of triggered. And we do that in the halls of commercial environments. We don't just partner with a partner, we activate within where they work and they communicate with their consumers. At the same time, on the grant making side, we have a really aggressive and ambitious 5-year grant making strategy for Red Nose Day and for our Comic Relief remit of a just world free of poverty. What does that actually articulate and what does that articulate into? What does that mean in terms of the needle moving work that we can do here in the US and abroad? And so I feel like there's rich work to sort of innovate against for both of those areas. And the hybrid of the two is what makes us unique.
That's great. Well, and I want to get a little bit more into some of those things with the Red Nose Day, as you mentioned. Maybe you could dive into, as you're talking about priorities and some of your goals that you were having for this year. No doubt, I've had a lot of guests on the show, and we've talked about COVID-19 because it has impacted all of us. I mean, all of us have been impacted, right? It's one of those rare situations where we have all been impacted at the same time. So we're going through this together. So in a strange way, it's brought solidarity to among a lot of us, even across countries, internationally, particularly nonprofits. We can relate to the struggle that we're all in. And certainly COVID-19 has impacted nonprofits directly, mostly because we're so dependent on people's donations. And when people have less income to work with or other things have happened, they've lost their job, et cetera, they have less to give. So I'm curious for you and Comic Relief, how's this past year changed your organization's priorities for this upcoming year, 2021, particularly when it comes to strategy and planning? And in fact, maybe you can even talk about the Full Plate project, which I understand you did the end of last year. Talk about that specific project, but just in general, how have you changed your strategy and planning because of COVID-19?
Yeah, that's a great question. We too got knocked off our socks a little bit when COVID hit, in two ways, really. Thinking about our own sort of operational plan as an organization and our goals and objectives and strategies, et cetera. But then also being deeply concerned with the organizations that we support and the sort of just massive deluge of need that was coming through their organizations. So it not only in terms of their own fundraising, unique fundraising opportunities above and beyond what Comic Relief supports them with, but on their own day-to-day, in addition to their service layer getting more and more taxed. And so just raising of costs, lowering of opportunity or line of sight for revenue, that was a tumultuous time. So for us, I was here since September of 19, and I started pitched to the board, well-timed, mid-February, which is like our strategy for 2020, 21, and then for a 3-year strategy. And that strategy remains. And I think that's a good indication of a solid strategy, is that even with this sort of tumult of COVID, that's our North Star. And it really involves, on the macro side, expanding Red Nose Day to be not just a campaign of 2 months, but to think about how do we, of course, have those 2 months where we really galvanize the public in a very, very big way and raise the lion's share of what we do through all the ways that we do it. But then opening up the aperture to kind of expand through, there are 10 other months in the year, and what can we do to sort of, activate and tie into key issues that are happening and make that a time for Red Nose Day and a time for giving for consumers. So to your point about the Full Plate project, that's what we did in November and December, was really thinking about the landscape of what we thought were going to be issues for the children that we support particularly. And, coming out of Red Nose Day, we have a broad message of safe, healthy, and educated, and now empowered, which I'll talk about in a minute. But then we knew, of course, coming back for school, there would be a real learning gap going on with this sort of technology gap, as well as just the access gap that we're having with children. And then in the fourth quarter, hunger. And certainly hunger and food scarcity and food, insecurity, frankly, became even more of a stark reality when you started to see the kind of food banks and the lining up of cars, and really the recognition that COVID was affecting people economically, clearly health-wise, but also economically in two very polar opposite ways. And so at a time of giving, Thanksgiving, the holidays, coming into, to the December timeframe, it just felt the right thing to sort of wrap our arms around that conversation around hunger, food scarcity, and those issues, and bubble that to the top and use it as an opportunity to raise, which is what Full Plate Project sought to do. So 365, if you will, that's our moniker for it for Red Nose Day. This is part of our strategy. We'd like to sort of think about, if we do Red Nose Day really well, what are the other kinds of things that we could bring a galvanized moment, through partnership to consumers, and then covering some of the issues that we think are systemically related to poverty. And so there may be a host of multiple things. Mental health we're thinking about. We're thinking about homelessness, of course. We're thinking about, there's a variety of things. Social justice has been a major input for us this year, not only in the Red Nose Day Fund, but also thinking about could we build more support and raise more funds for social justice in a different way, leveraging sort of BIPOC-led organizations and community-led organizations. So that is part of our strategy, and we're continuing to articulate on that too. So I think COVID threw us for a loop because we really needed to focus on the fundamentals. We did a very quick agile pivot, if you will, with our partner with Red Nose Day last year with Walgreens. We did a digital nose that kind of came up within 2 to 3 weeks. We were all selling physical noses until about the end of March. And then we had to kind of retool very quickly. We put on a night of TV with NBC, and the production, everything in a studio was closed. So we had to do everything dispersed at everyone's houses, and ended up with a beautiful quilt of an appeal show, frankly, on night of TV that had the highest ratings we had in 5 years. And it was done in a very organic, authentic way. So out of the chaos came like some really interesting work. And I think that just speaks to the tenacity of the team and the focus, and really the commitment to our mission, because we were going to get this done and cross a line no matter what.
It sounds like you had your plan, you had your goals, you had your 3-year plan, but you also adapted really quickly because you had to, you're forced to. And the result was 5 times more when you normally had with a TV audience. That's pretty incredible.
Yeah.
That's remarkable.
Yeah. Well, the highest ratings in 5 years.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Sorry. Yeah. Okay. So not 5 times. Okay. All right.
I was like, I should probably.
Let's get the numbers straight. No, that's fantastic. The way to go to be so nimble. It's interesting. Yeah. We've talked about with other leaders on here, what makes the nonprofit sector a bit different than the for-profit. And I don't know, maybe this is people are talking about this from the nonprofit sector, but I do think nimbleness often is the beauty of the nonprofit sector. I think more particularly in relation to the government sector. Sometimes government sector cannot shift or pivot very quickly. It's a large, organization. It's hard to move and change in response to immediate need, but you obviously were able to do that. But my guess is your leadership experience in the for-profit world definitely helped you make that quick pivot. It made it work. And obviously here you are. So, okay, let's talk about go ahead.
Required. I'm sorry. I just think that is required in the for-profit world because for all the brass tacks that goes along with that, but so too for our world, when we miss that mark, that really impacts people's lives. And so I think that sort of spirit for the team, but also because of the way we activate, we were lucky. Our major fundraising is not done through a gala or through some of the other traditional means that happen in nonprofits. In some ways, because again, and it's not even through corporate, just plain donations, like here you go. We actually create a marketing and an engagement experience in these environments. And so our partners are nimble. We have to be nimble too. And the kind of connection of the two, very fast paced at NBC, very fast paced and dynamic at Walgreens, very fast paced and dynamic at Mars. And then all of our digital partners, it kind of contributes all together, which is great.
We'll be right back. I'm excited that Aplos is our featured sponsor for the Nonprofit Leadership Podcast. More than 40,000 nonprofit organizations already trust Aplos to manage finances, people, and giving efforts. It's time to empower your nonprofit with better accounting, stewardship, and financial reporting. Go to nonprofit.aplos.com to see how it works and get your free trial. Hey friends, thanks so much for listening to the podcast. If this is your first time listening to us, I wanted to make sure you're aware of a whole group of other episodes with fascinating guests that I previously interviewed. Just go to our website, nonprofitleadershippodcast.org. There you'll find numerous interviews of nonprofit leaders from all over the country, including some from other countries, all trying to make their world better. So when you go to our website, you can also subscribe to my monthly leadership update in order to get more content, ask me questions, and discover additional information. Just look for the subscribe button on the right-hand side of the webpage. Thanks again for listening. Now back to the show. Now, most people know about Comic Relief because of your Red Nose Day campaign. And now you've already mentioned that last year you went digital because of COVID, of course. So how are you approaching this year's Red Nose campaign versus last year? And anything else you think would be helpful for my listeners who are also trying to figure out what they're going to do with their fundraisers and galas now that they have to change them completely for 2021?
Yeah. So I think it's helpful to just say that, we've raised, Comic Relief US has raised over $260 million in the US, largely through Red Nose Day. And, we've had some other kinds of activations. As I mentioned, our sort of growth and innovation roadmap is going to be, like what's next in addition to Red Nose Day. So our partnership is generously supported, frankly, through Walgreens, NBC, and Mars. And that's how we come together every year in April, May as a timeframe. It kicks off at the beginning of April in Walgreens with the selling of physical noses, and then culminates at the end of May with a kind of TV event with NBC. And in between there is a whole lot of activity that we stimulate through digital partnerships. We have a ton of partnerships and some very interesting ideas around gaming platforms this year. We do the kinds of opportunity at checkout to round up your bill. We've done products and merchandise that are sort of signed by celebrities. So we do a lot of the ways to kind of come in with a partner, customize a Red Nose Day experience, allow them to sort of participate in what is a purpose-led campaign. And so the language around, why is brand X participating? We're better when we kind of integrate. It's less effective, frankly, to a consumer to turn them into a donor to just sort of say, hey, we support Red Nose Day and have it be very passive. So for us, it's a real interesting journey every year to figure out who the partners that we're bringing to bear this year. How can we make something feel real and authentic to what they do? And then therefore kind of yield the most results in return, So that plan, we're in the thick of it right now with Walgreens, and, they are the tip of the spear, as you probably know, for the vaccine, one of them for the vaccine distribution here in the US. And they're incredibly focused on delivering really safe areas and to help people optimize their health vis-a-vis the vaccine and other things. And so we're working with them about figuring out what that looks for Red Nose Day and how Red Nose Day can kind of be a partner in sort of getting that message out and bringing in the communities. They're very community focused. NBC, same idea of figuring out how to pull those ideas of safe and healthy, which is a theme that all of us are going to be embracing, continued this year for the campaign. And then for the remainder of the year, we're looking at when we come out of Red Nose Day at the end of May, at the Red Nose Day campaign at the end of May, we'll take a small nap and then we'll get back in it because there's more work to be done. And that is the third quarter and fourth quarter of this year, thinking about those places where ideas align, right? The kind of issues that we feel are really important. This year we launched a new pillar to our grant making for Red Nose Day. Right now, historically, we ensure that children are safe, healthy, and educated. And that's through a variety of over 25 nonprofits that are grantee partners that we support along those programmatic lines. That's how the Red Nose Day piece work. We're an intermediary in that regard, a very tightly partnered intermediary, I should say that. So this year we launched empowerment as one of our new pillars. And we really felt like that was a recognition and a way to sort of understand where addressing the root causes of poverty and some of the pieces that children are sort of faced with, which is like youth leadership and economic development, goes along with the more kind of prescriptive solutions as well, whether it's housing, it's health, it's, food. And that is a nice complement to our work. So as we look at the back half of the year, we'll elevate a lot of our thought leadership, our activations around some of the key areas that we think are important and do something similar to Full Plate Project or otherwise, to just keep our message strong and tap into the times of giving, the natural times of giving that are happening throughout the year. And I have to say, even though there were so many folks really affected clearly and devastatingly so through COVID, from an economic perspective, I've been overwhelmed by the amount of generosity and giving that has happened, both from a corporate and an individual partnership level. It's been really great to see people responding to the need.
I'm so encouraged to hear that. I've heard that from many of my guests, actually, that are nonprofit leaders as well, that they have not seen a dip per se in their giving. They've actually seen an increase, and it sounds like you've seen the same.
Yeah. And I think that is, I think the American public's eyes have been open to just how widespread, and particularly, around the element of poverty. I think and in the US, I think that's really the case, where working people living in poverty is a real thing here in the US.
Definitely.
And for people to wrap their heads around that and what that means has been an eye-opening experience. And I think getting closer to the issues and using our power of storytelling, frankly, to kind of make those issues understandable and accessible. We push that out in social, we push that out in digital. We are, clearly all of our work with NBC is storytelling led, even with Walgreens as well. I think the cognizance has risen, and that yields, I think, some material benefit in terms of people giving.
That's excellent. Well done. Well, remind the listeners, I know that Comic Relief started in the UK, if I remember right. And tell me maybe a little bit of the history real quick and how it split out to the US, and then how I'm assuming it's just two primary branches, or maybe there's more international outlets of Comic Relief as well.
Yeah. So Comic Relief is, the US is where the sister organization to UK, which is started by Richard Curtis, or co-founded by Richard Curtis, who's a film writer and a director or multiple films. You've heard of them: Four Weddings and a Funeral, Bridget Jones' Diary, Love Actually. I mean, he is just like a creator's creator, frankly. And, he started this with this sort of insight that what he had seen in the late 80s and understanding what was happening in Africa at that time, and then came back and basically launched the organization to where they've now raised over £1 billion since its inception in 1988. So, his continuation with our organization remains. He's on the board, he's the vice president of the board, and he's also very tied in with the UN Sustainable Development Goals, specifically UN, but the SDG specifically as an advocate there. So with that kind of as the profile of where we come from, they launched Comic Relief and Red Nose Day in the US 6 years ago. So
6 years ago.
Came in a band of British folks coming in, figuring out who are the folks that understand what Red Nose Day is, frankly, because it had such brand association and sort of an understanding of what the work was in the UK. And through the leadership at Mars, NBC, and Walgreens, it became a very similar construct to what's in the UK for the raising of Red Nose Day. But we started to do it every year as opposed to every other year, and really started to just brand what Red Nose was and what it meant to kind of support children and all of that. I think US listeners will recognize Comic Relief as maybe the association with HBO and an HBO show that happened in the late 80s as well, right? Mm-hmm. Which was Robin Williams and Whoopi Goldberg. And there was relationship there, but not the same thing. So we now are wholly owned Comic Relief here in the US, and we would love to investigate what opportunities are there as well for Comic Relief as an event activation or that kind of thing. So I think, our ability, which is what happens in the UK too. So our ability to grow not only Red Nose Day, but grow the other kinds of activations and ways to sort of align with purpose. That's what we're thinking. And it'll be very much in line with kind of the sort of, I would say, remit in the UK.
Excellent. No, it's good to know that. And this is a bit of trivia. I could be off on this. Was the original inspiration Robin Williams' Patch Adams character with the red nose? Was that the original? That's people ask me that. I'm like, I don't think so, but maybe I'll ask.
I don't think so either, but I don't know the answer to that. I guess I probably should. This is like, after
where did the red nose come from?
Change,
right?
I should have. Yeah. That I do know that there was I've heard Richard tell many stories about it. So there were many kind of hilarious uses of the red nose early on. But I'll have to get that. I've heard lots of references as to what started it or what the original inspiration was, but I'll have to come back to you on that.
Cool. Yeah, just more out of curiosity. Yeah, little trivia here.
Yeah.
Oh, good. All right. So as you look into the crystal ball when it comes to fundraising for nonprofits over the next, say, 1 to 3 years, and now broadly speaking, obviously you've shared a little bit of your experience with Comic Relief. What should nonprofit leaders do? And I'm thinking to my listeners now, from your perspective, when it comes to fundraising, to prepare for the future and really adjust to the new realities that we face. I mean, should we change the way we do fundraising? Should we change more structural aspects of our nonprofits? Or what's your advice to my listeners for those who are nonprofit leaders?
My first and foremost concern coming into 2021 is managing cash flow and figuring out, how we smartly manage the operations of the organizations to continue to kind of be able to produce and develop the benefit that we do, And so keeping the organization fit, alive, healthy, activated, that's that is a cash flow thing. So that's first and foremost. And the reason I bring that up is because I think in a desire for everyone to be innovative, in a year that you have to pivot, you have to be really smart about like having line of sight to where your deepest areas of fundraising are currently, and making sure that you're sort of like protecting those oak trees, if you will, of income generation. So this would not be the year that I would not focus on Red Nose Day is my first and foremost priority, because that is the lion's share of where I can really raise and make sure that's an incredible and sort of fruitful experience. My diversification and I have a whole roadmap that we've built around like thinking of new ideas to generate new levels of income, whether it's a new temple event or another lines of income ideas. Those I need to keep the momentum on all of those. So it's sort of like focus on the big, and I think this is obvious, and most of your listeners in the sort of leadership roles are probably doing this already, which is just focus on the high impact areas and ensure that you don't diffuse to the point where that starts to waver. But you can't keep your eye off the innovation side too, and uncovering other opportunities to diversify. And I think that's what really kept us strong, frankly, during 2020. We came in with less income than we had the year prior, but that was to be expected, but not at a margin that I thought was crazy. I was pleased with that, So focus on the oak trees. You have to continue on your innovation roadmap, because that's just what you have to do. And I think when you're speaking to donors, one thing that's been really clear this year is that everybody's speaking to the same person all the time. So, if anything, there's been a deluge of outreach to consumers. They're bombarded, not only from brands, from nonprofits, from individuals, from their friends, their followers, it's just a cacophony of calls to action, frankly. And I think looking at the messaging, the story you're telling, the how clear and authentic it is, and not mixed up in industry jargon, like getting to somebody's heart as to what the issue that you're trying to cover, and making it a clean communication strategy, I think is important more than ever this year, because it's just, and in some ways it's good because more is more. But in some ways, if you're looking at your own business and back to the cash flow and the business model and all that stuff, clarity is key.
So it sounds like with, the cacophony, as you say, of all the voices out there asking for money, the more clear you are as an organization, the better.
Yeah, of your goals and objectives and your story, and also what's happening, where's the money go? Because I think that's the other part of it, is that consumers, consumer donors, because of where we raise, that's always the language that we use. Donors they're asking more questions now. And I don't mean that in because there's something nefarious going on. I just mean that they're smarter. The donors are smarter now. Mm-hmm. They're like, oh, I'd like to know what's happening. Tell me more about that. Mm-hmm. What is my 10, 12, $100, $1,000 donation? What does it do? Because I want to feel like I'm having an impact. And I think that level of explanation is on the go forward going to be more and more key.
Yeah. No, that's great. Well, you already kind of mentioned this a bit, coming from the for-profit world into the nonprofit world. This is a podcast dedicated to leadership. Are there any other leadership principles that you feel like have been really important that you carried over, or perhaps they're just equally important in either sector, whatever sector you're in? But maybe talk about the leadership principles that you feel like have really served you well in your current role.
Yeah, I think, we're a small organization. To the point earlier, we're nimble. We are bootstrapped in some ways, it's a very much of a startup mentality. So having had that experience at startups and smaller and leading digital organizations, I think the impetus to collaborate, I have this whole concept of drive and ride, which is like, it takes a village to do anything, because particularly, not one person has the only line of sight. There's a lot of times a lot of collaboration, and you can do that really inefficiently and ineffectively if you don't kind of have a model for that operating model with your team. And I that's a big thing for me. I think authentic and open and transparent conversations and leadership is key. I think now, even when they're all in these little boxes and we're not in the same space, is, that was always my style, but I think it's actually more important now than ever. And then driving innovation. I as a leader of the organization, I should have a vision and that is able to be articulated to everyone in the organization about where we're going. I don't have all the answers, but the North Star is important. And that certainly comes from my for-profit background. And so that's, I think, in the kind of framing of leading the team. And then personally, I've been thinking a lot about three P's, which are perseverance, perspective, and patience. I feel like for myself, for my team particularly, is one thing I left off on the team dynamic is also giving them the grace and the space to kind of handle the deluge of what's going on right now and still get their work done and kind of, provide an environment that supports both, right? It goes to the same thing to yourself as a leader. I mean, I have to remember to kind of give myself the same space to sort of be a human being during this time too, because it's important. And I'll do better work for the team and for our work all together if I do. And that sometimes it's just perspective, right? That you have to maintain and all that stuff, and patience with yourself and perseverance. I mean, this year is tough. It's going to continue to be tough. January is not so great.
Right,
I mean,
exactly.
It's dark and cold. So
exactly.
Resilience and perseverance.
Yeah. I like those. I like the three P's. That's fabulous.
Three
That's
P's.
great.
Yeah. I know.
That's good. Well
Resilience
done.
was an R, so I kicked that out.
You're like, nope. Okay.
Yeah.
It's got to be easy to remember and portable.
Right.
Well, thank you so much. Well, for my listeners, tell us, how can they find out a little bit more about you and more about, of course, the Comic Relief USA? Yes, please. So comicrelief.org is our website, and that has everything not only on Comic Relief, but also on our general organization, but also Red Nose Day as well. And then we are all over the socials, if you will. Yeah. So a Comic Relief handle and Red Nose Day handle on Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, you name it, we're there. Nice. So come engage with us. But then also if you want, a lot about our work, particularly our grant making work, some of the stuff that we're doing around the empowerment pillar. And as I mentioned, a lot of interesting things we're doing with sort of youth oriented programs, and we just launched a youth advisory council. Come find out about that. Some really innovative work going on there. Yeah. Okay, perfect. Well, Alison, thank you so much again for being on the show. Thanks for all you're doing, and really appreciate your insights and sharing those with my listeners. Well, I appreciate the time and great conversation. Thanks for having me. Hey friends, I wanted you to know that this podcast can be found on both iTunes and Spotify. If you're wondering how to find it, just type in the words Nonprofit Leadership Podcast and this podcast should show up. We also encourage you, when you go on iTunes, let us know what you think. Give us a review. Give us a rating. We would love to hear what you think of this podcast, and your feedback will help expand this podcast to get it out to as many people as possible. You can also find other resources and interviews of past guests on my website, nonprofitleadershippodcast.org. Again, that website is nonprofitleadershippodcast.org. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, keep making your world better. What's unique about Aplos is that they are dedicated not only to providing you with the best tools, but also to offering free training from their in-house experts and CPAs. Right now, you can get access to a solid webinar on 5 essential financial reports for nonprofit leaders. To get access, go to nonprofit.aplos.com.